everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show. This show where we talk about all the crazy stupid stuff that people do in marketing and how you can not do that, but instead can do smart, meaningful, aligned stuff with your marketing time, effort, budget, and energy. And today we're talking about, well, something that I think we're all in the age of right now, but maybe have been more in the age of before than we might think, which are these times of uncertainty. And I mean, we can use the C word, COVID, that I think kind of kicked off maybe this unpredictability that a lot of us, I think, thought was, do you guys remember at the beginning of COVID when we were all like, this is going to last for like a month? And then that was not true. And then depending where you are in the world, it lasted for like much, much longer than that. And there's still fallout that's happening from that, both in like illnesses and from a business point of view. And so there was a new ignition point for some uncertainty. And a lot of people started talking about it. And we also live in a time where we can talk about things and then they can spread globally very, very quickly. And so we are living in conditions where the, shall we say, uncertainty of uncertainty is creating lots of feelings for people and lots of impact on businesses because of the feelings of those people who work in those businesses. And so we're going to explore the complicated web that we weave of uncertainty through the human experience, through business, and at the end of the day, how we can perhaps change our perspective about uncertainty and how we can play nicely with it if it's not going to be, in fact, leaving us alone. So quick hello to our fellow, I feel like my words are not coming to me as quickly as possible today, folks. But these are our peeps who are always hanging out, right? Meryl, thank you for coming. Gary, always good to see you too, my friend. If you are watching us live as well, I highly encourage you to get into the chat, into the conversation, because this, well, it might look like a conversation for two people, is actually a conversation for all of us. And when we're talking about big things, about uncertainty, there's lots of different perspectives. And the more that we can bring into the conversation, the more robust we can make the conversation for everyone, including the panelists today. So please feel free, and I would highly encourage you adding your voice to the conversation as well. Okay, with that, if you are a regular on the show, you will know that I don't come and just talk about things myself on the show. We have conversations on the show, and therefore I always have a phenomenal guest to bring their perspectives and insights into the conversation. And today I'm super honored to have Kathleen, who quite literally wrote the book on how to navigate. Yeah. There it is, marketing in the big, what is it?
Big, messy, real world. And so I have mixed feelings about having that really long title, because the other part is rewiring your marketing organization to navigate anything. So that's the first part of the title is, this is our reality, as you stated, Tracy. This is our uncertain reality. And then the other part is, oh, we actually can be better in facing it. We can't necessarily make it go away, although there are certain things that we can do to reduce it. So, yeah, so I'm Kathleen Schaub. Thank you for having me, Tracy. And today, in my world today, I'm an author. I obviously wrote the book. I also write articles, and and it's all about marketing management strategies and how we can be more effective in an uncertain, complex world. And but for my career, I had a long stint as a marketer, including a CMO, and I was also led IDC's CMO advisory practice, where I was guiding people, marketing leaders, and tech companies, all the biggest tech companies down to just, individual startups and everything. So quite a long time deep in the trenches, the same as I'm sure a lot of your audience and our future participants are going to pay attention to. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to share what I've learned.
Yeah, and I'm excited too because I am also looking at who is here. Also Wolfram, who never shows up as only shows up as LinkedIn user, but we know it's you. From all over the world that have different corporate backgrounds as well. So I'd really love to hear your interpretations and your perceptions and your experiences throughout the show as well. So feel free to add them to the chat, you guys. Okay, Kathleen, we were talking about some different places that we could start before we got to the show. And then this word always really resonates with me, and it's in the subtitle of the book, which is the word navigating. And every time I think of navigating, I think of a ship. And if we are sailing a ship, which I have done precisely once in my life, so I will not pretend that I am the expert on sailing ships. But there are a lot of things that we don't control in that scenario. We do not control the ocean, the tides, the wind, a whole bunch of things that we don't control. And there are also things that we do control. So when you speak about, or the experiences you have of navigating the uncertainty, is there a way that we can look at uncertainty as a natural phenomenon, or something that we can start to just feel a little bit more comfortable with the fact that it exists?
Okay, so there's a couple different ways we could enter that. First off, definitely that I'm with you on the idea of navigation. In my book, I have 4 mindsets that I think are useful for marketers and other people to think about how to be in an uncertain environment. And think like a navigator is one of those, along with think like an investor, think like a statistician, and think like an ecologist. So all of those, I think those worlds have something to teach us about working in an uncertain world. But let me step back just a little bit and talk about what are we talking about when we're talking about uncertainty? Because uncertainty isn't really the full picture of the world that we're talking about. I actually like the acronym VUCA, which came actually out of the military. Some people are a little bit objecting to the fact using military terms, but out of the 90s, based on some business principles that came out actually in the 80s, the U.S. Army War College came up with this acronym VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, or volatile, complex, or uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it was describing the military theaters that these folks were working in. And you were talking about maybe the ocean, or as a way to also think about that. So volatility, how much change is really happening, uncertainty, how much predictability is there, complexity is actually not just about being complicated. There's a whole science behind the way that complex systems work. But for right now, let's just talk about it like it's complex. And then ambiguous is like, what are we talking about here? Everybody has a different viewpoint of it. And right now we're in a time that feels, you brought up COVID. I was writing the book during some of, the latter parts of COVID. It feels like there's more going on. Things are more VUCA than they have. I'll throw AI into that as well as the, political and, military things that are going on in the world. So it just feels like so much is happening. And the world, our world, is always VUCA, but those elements shift from being not very volatile to being hugely volatile, not being, somewhat uncertain to being really uncertain. And now we do have a lot of things that are coming together to make that our situation very, very VUCA. So the skills, like the skills of a navigator, become even more important. We can't really make everything go to the kind of, stable, predictable, controllable, machine-like world that we would love to be able to have. But we can learn from navigation as an example of how to move forward in this world. I actually like to use driving. Because you're navigating driving. It's not quite, you don't get 60-foot waves coming over you, but you do get traffic jams, right?
And
So,
sometimes in Canada, you get snow squalls.
oh, what happens to driving when you get a snow squall?
Let's not talk about it, but we were experiencing it last week. I would actually say most people choose not to drive in a snow squall, which is probably a safe decision. But like, as an example, you drive slower, you drive more cautiously. You might drive on like more well-traveled paths than you travel on back roads. You're pivoting and adjusting to the conditions. And I actually love that you use that example, because I'm a big fan of when we can help people identify with times when they do that already. So
Yeah.
most of us drive or have driven something at some point. I even say to my son, he's 8 years old, I'm like, the hardest thing about driving isn't driving the car. The car is not the most complex part of this ecosystem. You need gas, and all the parts have to be connected properly, and then the car goes. I don't know that much about cars either, but the other drivers on the road and how they are driving, the weather conditions, and all of these things you don't control as a driver. You do need to perceive as a driver in order to keep yourself and your vehicle safe.
Yes, and that's, so let's just keep on that that analogy, that metaphor. And you brought up a couple of different things that are really important in understanding these things. One is that part of the skills or the knowledge or whatever that have to do with understanding complexity, understanding uncertainty, and how to move forward is to recognize that the context is really, really important. So there are some of the skills, like what are the things that we do in business or in life to inform ourselves about context and make the right decisions given the context. So a lot of times, I think this is the one thing that's true a lot in marketing, is that we're very focused on what we're doing. And, we've got our plan, we have our goals. And we really don't pay enough attention to what is going on in the world, what is going on in the market, what's going on with our customers. And sometimes are confused or fail to adapt to, or even just, like we're talking about, you talk about cars, you don't know a lot about cars, you said, but you know enough to know I better have enough gas in my tank to be able to get to where I'm going, or I'm going to have to build into my system. I have an EV, so I have to look for supercharger stations and stuff now. But you have to think about those kinds of things, about how do I create the conditions for making sure that whatever happens, I have the best chance of being successful, because you can't control it, right? So I had an EV. One time, my husband and I went up to the mountains. We did not anticipate that going up the mountain would take more power than we anticipated. So from a mileage standpoint, we had plenty of what we call electrons. We had plenty of electrons. But as we got closer and closer to the top of the Sierras, we're going like, we're getting pretty darn low here. Fortunately, there was a Hard Rock Cafe where we could just plug in right as soon as we got there, go in, do a little gambling while we're waiting for our car to. But this is part of it. I call this market system health, which is all the things that one does in marketing to try to make sure that whatever happens is as successful as you can get. So that's one aspect of it. And a navigator is going to think forward about what are those things that I can do. You can't predict it, but you can be as ready as you can, so that sometimes you're going to need them, sometimes you're not.
Right.
So that's one aspect that I really liked about what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect is that concept of adaptability and adapting your behavior. So I use the word agility because you want to be able to adjust in as close to real time as you can. And what are the conditions and skills that you need to create that responsiveness to the conditions? And there are a lot of things that people do today in business and in other worlds to make you more agile. So I think if you do those kinds of things, if you create market system health, and if you increase your ability to be agile, you will be, you can't always guarantee that things are going to go your way. You can't always make your numbers exactly how you want them to do, but you can be more certain that you're going to be successful no matter what the circumstances are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about, I want to come back to this creating conditions for the market system health, but I want to talk about the agility first, just because it's interesting that right now, the project that we are working on for phys ed with my 8-year-old is agility.
Okay.
And so we have to come up with an agility course, and then like they perform this, right? So when I'm thinking about agility, I'm like, okay, well, yes, agility is a skill set, and there's like a identity of and a kind of a destination of achieving a certain amount of agility. But then there's also practices that go into becoming more agile. So if we are looking at agility not as a kid dodging dodgeballs, but in like the marketing arena, what are some of those like agility exercises that we might be able to try on?
Well, let's go back to the navigation and the agility and the navigation, because I think one of the most important skill sets, if you will, and it's actually very common. I'm a big proponent of agile marketing, and it hasn't gotten as much press. I mean, particularly since the AI world has come about, and some people have done exceptionally well in agile marketing. Others have not. I think the ones that have not are usually trying to, they only partially apply it or misapply it. But it's a concept that I call wayfinding, and other people call it other things. But let me describe what the stages of the process of wayfinding is, and I think people will relate to this. So it's actually a term out of the design world, industrial design, like how they design buildings and signage and stuff. They take advantage of like, well, how do people find, like, let's say you're going to go into a building and you don't know where you're going, or you go back to the driving. You know that the shopping center that you're trying to find is kind of generally over there. Let's put aside the GPS for a little bit, but the GPS is a really important tool. How do you go about, like, just take the building? You're going to probably walk in the door, and then you're going to kind of look around and go, where should I go? And you go like, oh, well, here's an elevator. So you walk up to the elevator, and then you get some more information like, okay, it looks like where I'm going to go is probably on the second floor. Press the button on the second floor. You get up there, you get off the elevator, you look around. So this whole thing about wayfinding is that you learn something, or first you take an action, because if things are changing, you do not get smarter by stopping and holding your head around. You have to take action first. You have to go forward, like, okay, I'm just going to go in the door and start looking around. Then you learn, and then you adapt your behavior based on what you've learned, and you take another action, and then you learn again. So it's a constant learn and adapt, learn, act, adapt, learn, act, adapt. And you do this when things are very uncertain, you do them in very small increments. So one of the things that is not good when things are uncertain is like your annual plan. So once a year, depending on how big your company is, it might take 2 weeks. So you have AI now, so you can press a button and get it in 30 seconds. But, is it really accurate? Or you can take this really long time because everybody has to align and interlock and things like that. But by the time that you get that plan done, it is already out of date. And so that's not very useful. So in uncertain times, what you want to do, even if you don't have any idea where you want to go, is take the best action that you think is the right one right now, but only do a small one. To your point about driving in the snow, you want to go a little bit slower, a little bit more carefully when things are uncertain, but you don't want to stop. You still got to go. Then you figure out how you can learn, and then you act again, and you adapt it, and then you act again. So taking that just incremental steps, you have a much less chance that when you get to whatever the destination is, and sometimes that has to change too, that you're going to have something bad happen along the way, or that you're going to be very misaligned with whatever's happening in the market or whatever's happening with your company. So that is one important method, if you will, for agility. Because you don't always think about agility as speed. Sometimes speed is good, and sometimes speed is not good. It's not good to get someplace fast and then find out you're in the wrong place.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what I love about the concept of agility. I mean, I always think of like jungle cats when I think of agility. Like, they can move very fast. They can also jump. They can also like change direction really fast. So there is a speed component, but it's not like a unidirectional blind speed. Like, we're going here and this is the only place that we're going and we're not taking any detours. It is still like there's like a holistic perception of what's happening around, and that you can move quickly in a different direction if so needed. Jungle cats.
Yeah. So talking about, that concept of a holistic view, or even what's going on in the cat, the cat's eyes or whatever, is that what can you do? So intelligence plays a really important role in that. And we are fortunate to live in a time when there is more intelligence than ever before. So there are intelligence practices that you can put together in a company to help you with that learning situation. But when things are uncertain, you want to focus on learning as much or anticipating as much as you can, not necessarily looking backwards. So a lot of marketing metrics are focused on backwards looking things, like how much revenue did we make last quarter or last year. That's one kind of information, but it's not really that useful. Instead, when you're in uncertain times or when you're in complex systems and stuff like markets, you want to focus on the kinds of metrics and the kinds of data that will help you to see trends and see patterns, and to anticipate what might be the signals that things are changing up ahead. So it's a different kind of metric system, a different kind of measurement, but it is hugely important. And when I was at IDC, I used to say, if you have one more dollar of marketing budget, spend it on data, but not data looking backwards, data that helps you to go forward. So predictive kinds of analytics is the kinds of things is what you want to focus on.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about this in the concept of the like jungle cat. Right? And so like there's clues. If I'm thinking, I'm not from the jungle, so now we're making interpretations again, but like there is information, right? There are sounds, and there are birds flocking, and there are like these things that are happening in the environment that are observable by us. But if all we're doing is looking behind us and being like, oh, there's probably something back there, then we miss out on a lot of that additional
Yes.
information. And so
100%.
this is what, I mean, if I'm looking at it then as a linear path, we actually we're kind of locked into that linear path, right? So we're always just looking straight back. I mean, I know what happened back there, right? I can look straight back and I can see what happened. I can see my paw prints in the mud, but like, how much information do my paw prints in the mud tell me? It might tell me that it's wet, and maybe I want to watch my footing because it's wet. Or maybe if I'm a cat, I don't care that much. But like, there's only a very small percentage of the overall information that is back there. And if as marketers, we are spending 90 or more percent of our data analysis time on what's back there, then there's a lot of stuff that we will just run out of time to look at.
Yeah. And I think, this is true. I mean, going back again, we are in particularly uncertain times, particularly complex times, but this is never not true in marketing. It's just a matter of degree. And if you're in a very large, stable market where you have mature brands and your customers are, pretty dependable, and you have a lot of online data that you can see, that what the future is probably not going to feel as uncertain as you might be if you're in a small company that with lots of, a considered sale where lots of data is missing because customers are doing things outside of your systems and things. But there's a mental shift that has to happen, both in the metrics and also in the way that you're working, that leads people to that backwards looking path. And that is that people are looking for their metrics to serve mainly the purpose of goal or scorekeeping. So in other words, I set this plan in place. Did I get this many, content downloads? Did I get this many leads? Whatever it is. And so it becomes a scorekeeping exercise, which is not very useful to the point that you just said. It's just like I set my plan back here, and I did or meet the goal that I set up, 6 months ago or whatever. That isn't very useful from an execution standpoint. If the real goal of the company is to get more revenue, to get more customers, to be more profitable, which are most of the business that you want, you might have some other goals as well, then your goal should be, how can I do that better?
Right.
Not should I meet some, frankly, not some random, but somewhat outdated goal that it was in the past, but how can I be more effective as a marketer? And you want to set your dashboards up and your measurements and your intelligence systems up in a way that helps you to move forward better and more accurately, so that the result is that when you look back, you go, oh, I'm actually have more customers now than I did. My customers have, are buying more from us. My sales was closing more quickly.
Mhm.
That should be the goal of your data, your primary goal of your data. It's not that you don't want to measure that other things. Of course, it is an accountability and a validation point of view, but it's not the most important thing that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that's interesting from a goal setting perspective, because if our goal isn't inherently connected to the motion that we want to see, and I've seen a lot in marketing where it's like, we'll do 4 blog posts this month, and you're like, good, okay, to what end? What is that supposed to do? What is your hypothesis about what it will deliver? And then once you do that, did it deliver that? What kind of tweaks do we need to make? If we still believe that it could deliver that, but maybe we need to adjust something. You mentioned kind of I call them micro experiments, right? So like the micro experiments that we do to move us closer to the thing that we're doing. And if that experiment for whatever reason had a bad hypothesis, right? So it's like, okay, well, we have learned that. We can now throw that out, and we can hypothesize again with perhaps even new information, because now we have decided there's more places we can look.
Yes. So you want to be able to take, so to your point about the hypothesis and the scientific method is a form of wayfinding, because you're setting up a hypothesis, you're doing experiments to gather data, and that is a method. It is not the job of marketing per se, but it is a method to get there. And one of the key things is that you want to look at the variance in the data that you're getting as information, not as pass fail. So if your goal was like, okay, it's not wrong to say like I'm going to do 4 blog posts or whatever this week or whenever, if because that's the action that you want to take as you start to wayfind. But then you want to learn from what is the market telling me about that? What can I learn? And then look at that variance, not as, like, oh my God, not all 4 of them got a bazillion likes and downloads or whatever, but rather to say, what is this telling me about the world at large? So I'm now noticing that one of the 3 really did well, one totally failed, and the other ones were kind of meh. So what is that telling me? Well, let's try it again, and maybe let's alter a little bit, like, oh, they liked the topic of, the first, blog post 1, or was it timing, or was it, so how do you just continue that series until frankly you get to a place that's boring, because it is so reportable. I mean, this is actually one of my former clients said, good marketing is actually really boring, because you're just constantly making these little micro shifts and learning. There's no big, like, oh my gosh, we're going to do a huge brand refresh or whatever. Those are the fun projects. We've all worked on them and stuff. But the real useful stuff is fairly boring. It can be fairly boring if you're doing your job right, but you're actually meeting your, you're moving through, you're driving, the uncertain roads pretty successfully when you're doing that.
Right. Oh, I love that. Okay. I want to come back because this question, what is this telling me about the world at large, I think is a really important way to frame it as well, because I think a lot of times people can look at a test or micro experiment or hypothesis or however you're phrasing it, and then get into that right wrong. I had a bad idea, and they make the data about me. But really it's me interacting with a wider ecosystem of things. And so if there's probably information there about my own behavior. Sure. This is why I always say energy as part of the introduction to the show, because there's a lot of us in marketing who have found ourselves doing drudgery activities where there's like not driving our energy, and we do them. And especially if they don't have results, like, are we are we using that as information? That's a point of information. Let's consider that. But I think this is a really great way to target the exploration, is what is this telling me about the world at large? And
yes,
we can never know everything about the world at large, as much as we would love to say that we can as marketers. Like, customers are always evolving, and markets are always changing, and economics are changing, and like everything is moving all of the time. So we can't like stick a pin in it and be like that forever. Like,
yeah,
it's not a thing.
No, yeah. You used a word that is also one of my mindsets, is about ecosystems. And this is actually I'm seeing amongst the dialogues that I have, this is getting a lot more play. So I think maybe in the future, I'll be building this up a little bit. And you think about, what is an ecosystem? So think about another analogy. I live in Northern California, so, I think about vineyards and stuff, yes, if you want to pay attention, if you want to have a good wine, you're paying attention to a lot more than just the grape. Right? The grape is important, what varietal you're going to use. But if you're a vintner, if you're a wine grower, you know that things like, how much sun do you have and how do you prune and what is the soil like? You're taking advantage of and trying to optimize. It's kind of going back to that market system health thing, is that everyone's performance, whether it's a performance as an individual, like you're a team leader and you're looking at the performance of your individual team, or your own performance, or the performance of the company, it all takes place at the intersection of what you do with what the context is. And
Mm.
so one of my findings is, we're thinking like an ecologist, is thinking about how do I optimize the surrounding things so that I will be, or my team will be, or my company will be as successful as it can be. So we get kind of locked in, our culture, I think, is very individualistic, which has its pros and cons, but it's a reality. So we tend to think about ourselves as having like, more control maybe, or more blame, blame when things go bad, and, and or even it tends to be, we tend to blame ourselves more if things go bad than we pat ourselves on the back if things go well. That's just the way that human nature kind of works. But as a manager and as a marketer, you want to think about what is the connections that are happening around me. What is the network that my people are working in? What is the ecosystem? The partners, the competitors, the customers, of course, and all the different kinds of customers there are. How is the interplay between them affecting what I do, and recognize and paying just as much attention, whether it's in the intelligence world or whether it's in the program optimization world or the education or whatever. How can you have to pay as much attention to the ecosystem as you do to the individual parts within that ecosystem? That is a big shift.
Mhm.
It's a big shift for our culture. It's a big shift for companies. It's a big shift for us as individuals, because it's not something that comes naturally,
Right.
something we have to foster in ourselves.
And I think it's a big, if we're talking about data again, I see it as a big shift in data, right? Because now there's actually different data points that we are looking at too. We are looking at the interrelationship of two data points. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about like in a scenario where maybe you have two partners and those partners are like opposite, like hard competitors in a market, right? And then there's energy there that is not the same energy that is present in necessarily every ecosystem. So being cognizant, and I mean, first of all, even looking for those types of things, but then look, appreciating the complexity of that from the
Yeah.
VUCA point of view.
Yes. I had a former manager years ago that kind of got me down, focusing more on this path. Because whenever I would bring him any data, he would say, as compared to what? So you'd go like, hey, we got, you know, 40 bazillion leads this quarter or whatever. And then he would say, as compared to what? Is that good? Is that bad? What am I supposed to do with that data point?
Mhm.
And, it's thinking about it's like asking that second level, that third level of questions every time, and trying to avoid thinking about the world as a machine that's made up of individual components, but rather it is a living system. All businesses, all teams, everything, they're living systems with all of this constantly shifting relationships to each other, connections to each other, things happening way outside the frame that you can even perceive, but you just know that it, could be affecting you, good and bad.
Mm.
So that's, those are the kinds of things. This is where I believe that a mind shift and getting those analogies, those metaphors, and, bringing to bear what you already know as, as a driver, as a parent, who's working on, the agility, all of these things, we know how to do this, and we do it well in a lot of portions of our lives. Now we just need to apply it to our business world, to our teams, and to our markets, and we'll be a lot more successful.
Yes, the application is where it always comes down. Okay, Gary actually has a really great question
Okay,
in the
Gary.
chat here. When we consider adapting and adjusting and agility in order to move forward, where does rest or taking time out fit in, and how can we use it to reach our destination vis-a-vis marketing?
Yeah, so let me take a little bit of a note from the agile world, because the original agile, which came out of software development, was very, very human oriented. And one of the things that they wanted to talk about was, making work human sized and human benefits. We have so much technology now in the world that it has really taken a lot of the drudgery out, and AI is going to take even more of the drudgery out of things that we're doing. And so what becomes more important is the human factor. And we want our people and ourselves we want to bring our best selves to work. We want our people to bring their best selves to work. So part of that, creating the conditions for success, is to create a work environment or a personal environment that allows us to be our best selves. And I think rest is an important aspect of that. So, yeah, this going back to the concept, it's not always about speed. Speed and relentlessness can work maybe for a car, but it's not going to work very well for a human being. So I think sometimes that go slow to go fast is a good thing to think about. And we have to think about the cells. We live in a human body. They do require certain things. We have to be able to give ourselves and our teams those things in order for them to be able to perform as well. That's part of that whole ecosystem conditioning. So thank you, Gary, for that question.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because when we look at a lot of arenas and how they have structured the world of work, it's almost like, yes, you can have rest, but not during your 8 hours while you work here, right? Like you have to go rest on your own time. And then we get parents who are also parenting, which is not, there's no rest in that. You have young kids, it's not a rest activity. You send parents home to that, they're not getting rest, and they're probably not getting actual rest either in terms of like the amount of sleep that they need. So it's one thing to say like sleep is the body aligned time for sleep is night. Right? And so if you're not working at night, but then it gets all screwed up if you're working night shifts. Anyway, yeah. But I think the opportunity or the possibility that I see in this is even just like creating little moments of rest. And I think culture gets built on what is celebrated. And so if we are celebrating that people worked until midnight to get this done, that's not really the narrative of rest, right? If we're celebrating that, like I went for a walk at lunch because it's so nice outside, then that, and it doesn't have to be long, right? Like we don't even have to use huge chunks of time in order to get rest. I think it's just a really interesting, I think it's an important part of the conversation. And if it is not a part of the conversation, if we think that a human can just come and use their brain for 8 hours a day and not get rest, no refuel, no recharge, no reset, no regroup, no rest, that will be functioning at the same capacity that it could have been if it did have some rest.
So let me geek out a little bit. In my book in the early chapters, I talk a little bit about Frederick Winslow Taylor and Taylorism and how it, the whole idea of standardizing and his thing, without geeking out too much, my publisher actually made me take a lot of it out. She says, people want to get to the information. They don't want to. I was very excited about, whoops, I'm banging my desk here. But the core of the idea was that work was pretty haphazard before Frederick Winslow Taylor and people like Henry Ford and stuff came in, and then they started seeing how standardization and being able to put different rules in place and stuff really made work so much more productive and so much more efficient. In the first time, like it was around 1900 or so, in they had like a World's Fair, and he showed how, like in a steel mill, you could increase the productivity of a work team by, not with the same exact people, like 500%, by putting in some of these standardizations and things. And during the first part of, he wrote a book called Scientific Management, and that became like the bestseller. It's still in print and still sells. And it's all about efficiency and standardization and productivity. And it has contributed so much to the standard of living and, medicine and, the food supply. We couldn't have done that without the stuff that Frederick Winslow Taylor put in place. So in that regard, thank God for Taylor. But on the other hand, the more VUCA that something becomes, the less valuable or useful, or the more unintended side effects that there are to that kind of a system. So our work world, like 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever happens to be it, that is a Taylor invention. And I think it's going to take a long time, but I think there are spots where people are experimenting with different ways of working, the whole, like, can we have people work at home, at least part-time? What would that be like? What are we missing if we do that? It's not like you can go all one way. But anyway, I think that it's going to take a long time, but I think we are all experimenting. Maybe those little micro experiments we were talking about, what works and then what goes, oh, that didn't work,
Right.
And move that forward. So hopefully we'll get more human and get more and a little bit less away, try not to take too much away from the benefits that we got from Taylor and his world, but still making it a little bit more human. I hope so. I think we will. I'm optimistic.
I think so too. I was having a conversation with someone else earlier today about our human pendulum swings, right? So we're like, everything makes sense over here. And then we're like, no, not everything makes sense over there. And then we're like, we have to find another place for that to all make sense. But we're not. And we're actually spend most of our time in this pendulum swing where we are in motion and we are not.
But that's part of that wayfinding.
Exactly.
Right. But every time it swings slightly different.
Yeah.
Because we've learned from the other side.
Yeah. Oh, a couple good comments here, and then I have one more question I want to come to.
Okay.
Gary says, I have performed at my most efficient when I was at rest. I think that's an important belief as well that maybe we carry or don't. You can answer that for yourselves. And Wolfram is sharing, a goldfish is part of the ecosystem in the pond, yet it can't see the pond from the outside. How would you foster that we actually slow down for curiosity instead of fast technical KPIs? I guess that is a question.
Could you put that up again? I want to see it a little bit more. Okay. How do you foster that we actually slow down for curiosity instead of fast technical KPIs? And the goldfish pond from the outside. I'm not totally getting the connection between those two, but let me respond to the idea, and maybe this will be getting at, is how do we get beyond the speed of the types of KPIs that are in typical business today. And I think, again, I'm going to go back to the experimentation and some of the things. I wrote an article, I can't remember where I placed it, but I can send you the link. You can send it out if you want, but it's about how to make a switch from, I interviewed a bunch of people who are adept at working with companies who are trying to make this switch. And one of the things that they said to do is to create sort of like a sandbox of some kind that's a little bit behind the scenes, So you got the KPIs that you're constantly having to work at. And meanwhile, you're on the side sort of developing these other ways of thinking, these other thoughtfulness, you know, basically the kinds of things we were talking about before, about how to look at the world's connections, how to put more meaning, how to look things that are more forward looking, how to change the way that you look at variance. And then when you start seeing that you've got some results, then you bring it over to the C-suite or whoever it is that you have to report to, so that you can, first off, know a lot more about your circumstances and be able to show what the pros and cons are for both kinds of KPIs. So that is sort of a methodology, if you will, for change, which is kind of to run both systems at the same time, because you're not going to be able to have enough information or enough capability to just go, swap it in today, like, hey, let's all be more curious about context. And everyone's like, well, how do we do that? You have to learn, how to do that. And my book has some ideas, but there's plenty of other people that have ideas out there. I hope that at least gets at part of that question. It sounds like there might
and
be
if it
more
doesn't,
behind
please
it.
feel free to ask an additional question. But I think that's the interesting thing too, is that often, again, maybe it is because of this like black and white thinking, is that like in order to turn curiosity on, we have to throw out all of our technical KPIs, and we don't have to throw out all our technical KPIs. We can actually use them as a basis to get curious. And like, hey, we have all these KPIs. Which ones are telling us like information that seems to be helpful? Are there ones that are telling us information that's not? I think one of the things,
it's not the KPIs. Let me just bust in here for a second. It's not the KPIs that are the problem. It's the way we think about the KPIs as a scorekeeper and try to create linearity and very specific causality that cannot happen in an uncertain environment. That same data, as you were starting to point out, and then I'll let you go, the same data can tell you something different if you look at it in a different way or if you create a context.
So, and that's where we can play. No, I love that. I love that, right? Like, especially when you like, I need to say this right now. Like, I really encourage that on the show. Okay, and I think that wrapped up exactly where I was going. So that's perfect anyway, because I want to squeeze in one more question before we run out of time. Because at the beginning, we were talking about creating the conditions, and you mentioned it again just recently as part of the conversation. And so in this world, in this VUCA reality, where we do not control all conditions, we do not control the market, we do not control people. I always say, if you're a parent that's ever tried to get a kid to eat peas, you understand that you don't actually control anything. How do we, or what type of, maybe let's look at it from a micro experiment point of view, because this is like an ongoing transformation, but how can we start to create the conditions that allow us to more successfully participate in that market system?
So some we already know about, and we know that having a solid brand is going to help you in different kinds of circumstances. We know that customer loyalty is going to have it. We know that strong partnerships. We already know what the list is, and there's not a lot to learn in that. There is some things, like we were talking about, being able to create connections and monitoring and fostering the connections within your organization and with your organization in the outside world. And in my book, do a little promo here again. Oh, it's kind of backwards, I guess, but you can see the picture. Let's look at the picture, the messy world picture. There are some other ideas, but I think people will find that a lot of the stuff we already know. It's just that we don't necessarily do it. It's like, for your health, that you should probably be exercising a little bit more. That you should probably not eat that extra candy bar at night. These things. This is a question of doing them. Every once in a while, we learn something new, like, oh, that's a new thing I didn't learn. And I hope that my book will give some new ideas into them. But in a way, it's kind of reinforcing some of the things that we already know how to do. We just need to be, patient and do them. And, just keep adapting like your brand and things like that. You don't have to like have this big whoop-de-doo, but you can learn, what's going on in your customer's world. You mentioned like when we're driving and we go, all of a sudden we slow down. That happens with customers too. Oh my God, we're having, all the fuel prices are going up. All your customers, go start slowing down. How are you going to adapt to that? That's not something we didn't already know,
Right.
but it's something that we just don't always pay attention to.
So would you say that maybe the opportunity is in I don't want to say deep dive. That feels like the wrong phrase, but in like looking at the things we haven't looked at, which is like hard
too broad. Yeah.
Right. Because you don't and we don't know what we don't know. Right. So, is there something that you could say that we could like pay attention to that would give us like a insight or a window into an area where what we believe is impacting our business in a like small way and there's opportunity to expand what we see?
Okay. All right, this might not be quite as world shaking as maybe we're hoping for.
I love things that are not world shaking because we're like, actually, we can do that by checking the time on your phone. Like, okay, that's probably not the right answer, but
this seems kind of mundane, but your information is not in your office. It is outside in your customer's world or your partner's world. I heard about years ago, a friend of mine was working for one of the big oil companies. And what he participated in was they took a van, or maybe it was more than just taking a van. Maybe they had to fly some places and stuff too. But they went through their entire supply chain. And they took people from headquarters and they brought them to the refinery. They brought them out to where they were actually, the oil was being drilled. They took them out to the service stations. They took them out to people's, people who were driving. They followed their entire supply chain. They had a cross-functional group of people. And they just listened to what was going on in the system. What were the interplays that were happening? I mean, they had some questions and things like that. But he said that it was the most eye-opening thing that he had ever done. And the fact that they were there with a cross-functional group, so it wasn't just marketing, it was people in all these different areas of the company. And they all just had these ideas, and this person knew this, and this person knew this, and I had no idea that was a problem. And oh my gosh, we can fix that in a heartbeat if we just knew that it existed. So I would say that going outside and actually not just looking at data and just looking at MQLs or content downloads or whatever, but go sit in front of a customer and watch what they do. Watch how they use your products. Watch how they use your website. Listen to them, your partners, everybody who's important. Go listen to them, and I will guarantee that lights will go on.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And if you are a common watcher of the show, you will have heard that theme come up multiple times about go be with your customers, especially in the new marketing era where there seems to be so many technologies that want to take us away from that. Paying attention to when we're getting the opportunities to do that and take advantage of opportunities to do that. You can learn so much. We want to talk about being effective with your time. Like, you can learn so much in such a small amount of time. And while it might look like an expensive investment to take a van of cross-functional people and explore your entire supply chain, if you also look at what you learned and the amount of time it took, there's probably a pretty good return on investment on that. Now, you also have to use the information in a meaningful way. Otherwise, the data collection is not best served. But man, there's a lot of good information out there right from the customer's mouth if you want to go do it. Oh, Kathleen, well, I feel like we could keep talking about this for a very long time, but we are out of time for today. So if people would like to continue the conversation with you about marketing in times of uncertainty, where is the best place for them to do that?
Well, I do have a website, KathleenSchaub.com. But I think LinkedIn is the most dynamic. And I always post, when I'm writing a new article or something comes up my way. And then, of course, I think, read my book, which gives you a really good grounding and hopefully has lots of stories and things in it that will be meaningful. So, yeah, I'm happy to link in with anybody on LinkedIn to continue the conversation.
Awesome. And very conveniently, if you happen to be watching this show on LinkedIn, then Kathleen's name is tagged in the post. So you can just click on her name and it'll take you right to her profile. Please feel free to connect. And I think uncertainty is at least a prevalent theme for most people right now. It might not be your top priority, but I think it's a thing that's we want to say ecosystem, in the ecosystem of your thoughts. For most marketers, don't let it just be a thing that sticks there and starts to feel heavier and heavier, but we haven't really done anything about it. The best first thing is go have a conversation. Connect with Kathleen, connect with me, connect with each other in the chat. Have a conversation about what does it mean? What does it feel like? What could we try? There's so much information in another person, and not just because you're interviewing it out of them, but because when two brains get together, there creates a third possibility. And when we go out and we get into conversation with experts, with people in different departments, right, to people in general, that third mind reveals itself. And there just might be some really interesting things there.
I love that term, the third mind. I might have to borrow that.
Oh, yes. Well, I stole it from Peter T. Britton, who told me I could freely use it, but I give him credit every time I do. It's a thing. It's just a thing. It's the way that I always say it's the phenomenon where you say a thing and then you're like, oh, that reminds me of this thing I read in a book. And then but you wouldn't have thought of that necessarily if that person didn't say the thing. There's so much possible in the combination of two. So get into conversations and see what new things might be possible for you in the area of marketing in times of uncertainty. So with that, everyone, thank you for joining us today. Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with all of us. And until next time, everybody, permission to do you.